currently doing. Some of you may know us from our Facebook group that we originally started called Within the Cauldron. It was semi-monthly discussions open to the pagan community, witches, and others, basically. Anyone identifying underneath those umbrellas.
The Witchcraft TV network has a brand new show called Within the Cauldron.
Hello, tonight we have a very special guest who happens to be a brother Cabot of mine.
You can join them in real time on their YouTube channel Within the Cauldron or past shows right here on Witchcraft TV.
Nico, we have Chrissy here, and then we have our guest Oberon Cell.
Within the Cauldron every Monday at 8 p.m. Keep it right here on witchcrafttv.online.
Hi, everyone. So as you saw with our introduction, this is the Within the Cauldron podcast. Tonight, we are featuring a very special guest, Mike Nichols. Some of you may know him by some of his publications. He has also been teaching Wicca for quite a while now, actually. So let's go ahead without further ado, jump right in, bring Mike up and the fellow co-hosts. We have Chris, also known as Thunder, and Nico, and then of course our author, Mike Nichols.
Thank you for joining us.
All right. So, Mike, just to kind of jump right in to more of your foundation, we'll begin with.
Sure.
How did you get into witchcraft? What led you to that?
Well, I have to take you back to my childhood to explain that. I grew up in a little town in Missouri called Carrollton, population of about 5,000. I always say that it was like growing up inside of a Ray Bradbury novel. My grandmother on my mother's side came from the Ozarks, and she practically raised me, and she just had a wealth of interesting stuff in her background that was magical and paranormal and all of that. She would not have called herself a witch. I think if anybody asked her, she would have said that she was Christian, but if so, it was a kind of Christianity known nowhere outside of the Ozarks back in her day. And it contained a lot of folk magic and folk beliefs and so forth. And I grew up with that, there was talk about ghosts and poltergeists and all kinds of supernatural stuff. She always did everything by the almanac, and told my grandfather when to go fishing by the phases of the moon, all of that. And that was just common dinner table talk for us. And so I thought that was normal. And I guess I guess I could say my first interest was in the paranormal. And it wasn't until, I must have been in late grade school before I began. I already had kind of an interest in magic and spells and things like that. But I didn't start to think of witchcraft as a religion until probably the publication of Sybil Leek's book, Diary of a Witch. I think that was the first book on witchcraft that I owned. And of course, Sybil spoke of witchcraft as a religion, as did pretty much everybody back in that time. Now, of course, I understand that has shifted somewhat, and people are no longer calling witchcraft a religion. But I'm so old school that I still do, and I will argue the point if anybody wants to get into a discussion with it. I remember being very influenced by a film that I saw called Bell, Book, and Candle. And watching that, I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if there was really this underground movement that contained witches and they were still alive today and still functioning in everyday society, but we just didn't know about it. I thought that would just be marvelous. And actually, I think I saw that first. And then I saw Sybil Leek appearing on Johnny Carson's show. And I thought, hey, the premise of that film is true. There really are witches. And so then I started studying witchcraft. That would have been, and I'm dating myself here, about 1966 when I was a freshman in high school. And by the time I'd finished high school, I considered myself a witch and had done my first self-dedication ritual because I didn't know any other witches. I dreamed of the day when I might actually meet another witch. Things were very different back then. And I mean, the thought of actually meeting a witch who was in a coven, oh my gosh, that was the ultimate mind blower, especially the thought that it was a coven that might have had a real true lineage that went back very far. And I had hoped to meet somebody like that. And indeed, I later on I did. But that was when I was first drawn to witchcraft. And by the time I was in the 8th grade, I should have said this earlier, I was raised as a Roman Catholic. And so I went to a Catholic school all through grade school and was taught by nuns and priests every day. And which was great prep work for being a witch because you already had a sense of the liturgics and the ritual and why ritual, why it was there, why we used that. I think that came more intuitively to me as I started witchcraft. And indeed, later when I was teaching witchcraft classes, I noticed that it was always the ex-Catholics or the people who had been raised in the Jewish tradition. They understood why ritual. The Protestant kids had a hard time with that because, they'd been told, no rituals. That's bad. That's bells and smells. We don't want that. And so I had a harder time, I guess, convincing them of the reason that rituals would make your intentions come about and manifest themselves much quicker than just trying to think them into being. So I don't know. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm already I have already 3 different other questions that I'm spinning off now just from your response. Yeah, well, just take a moment to kind of comment more on before we move further on what you said. I agree a lot with the some people now don't necessarily agree with witchcraft being a religion.
Right.
I feel like it's personally, I'm kind of with it being almost. I see it as 3 things it can be, and it can all overlap. In my mind, I kind of see it as a religion. I can see how someone can practice it purely as a spirituality, which I still think there's some crossover there. And then also just as a craft in itself. But there's quite a Venn diagram in my mind right now.
Right. I'm going to jump into that because that's one of my favorite discussion topics. I run across a lot of people these days who say things like, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And if you dig a little deeper into that, you find out what they're really saying is, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not Christian. And it's like they think that the only religion that counts is Christianity because that's the dominant religion in our culture. Or at the very least, they're saying, I'm spiritual, but I'm not a patriarchal monotheist.
Yeah.
And by saying that, they're leaving out all of the hundreds of thousands, and literally, I mean that, of people around the globe to this day who practice another type of religion that we call folk religion, or in tribal or indigenous religions. The Native American traditions are just one example of religion that's found around the world that patriarchal monotheism has nothing to do with. And so I continue to define myself as religious in those terms because I think witchcraft is a folk religion. I think it is the remnants of what was there in Western Christianity before in Western Europe before the coming of Christianity. So yeah, it is a religion, but it is nothing like a patriarchal one God, one true and only right God. I don't buy that at all, and never really did, even when I was being raised Catholic. I loved all of the liturgics of Catholicism. I loved their liturgical calendar, and of course, that's what that eventually became my niche. That's where I fit, because I loved all of the holidays and feast days. And oh, by the way, happy Krampusnacht, right?
Yes, Krampusnacht.
So yeah, anything that had to do with holidays, it was just my thing. But when it came to the theology that I was being taught every day, no, didn't buy it. And it was funny because I would listen to the nuns all day long, and then I would come home, go over to my grandmother's after school and tell her what the nuns had taught me, and she would just die laughing, and then she would tell me how it, quote, really was, So anyway, that's my take on why I see witchcraft as a religion. No, it's not an organized religion. And when people used to come to my witchcraft classes, they would say, well, I would introduce it and say, this is a religion. And they would say, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like this. I don't like organized religions. And I would reply, well, you're in the right place, because this is the most disorganized religion you've ever. So anyway.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that, though. Modern witchcraft has absorbed so many folk magic traditions within it that while they've benefited from it, and folk traditions are still also a standalone practice, there's been so much cultural exchange and crossover that it's intriguing to see where we're at and where we'll continue to go in the future.
Yeah.
I'm also a folk practitioner, so I absolutely love that you went there.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people that say, well, I'm a follower of Wicca. And, when I first started studying this, I mean, witches understood where the word, they understood that the word witchcraft came from the Old Anglo-Saxon Wicca, which was actually pronounced witcha at the time. So they knew the word, but it was never used. I mean, nobody ever said, I'm a Wiccan. That just didn't, it was never heard. I think the first, I did a little, let me see if I can consult my notes here to remember how this goes. But the first book that was ever published with the word Wicca in the title was, as far as I know, as far as I can find out, was Scott Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. And that was 1988. So, I had been practicing and teaching witchcraft since 1970. So this was almost 2 decades later before a book would ever be published with the word Wicca in the title.
I find a lot of witches use Wicca, the word Wicca, instead of witchcraft as a safety net.
Yes.
But they're more accepted by their Catholic or Christian peers. If you can even consider them peers, it's just a safety word.
Right. Yeah. By the time I was a representative on the Kansas City Interfaith Council, I went ahead and kind of bowed to the pressure and said I was the Wiccan representative of the Interfaith Council. But it was an odd an odd thing to do, because everybody else who was there, whenever the president of the council would say, okay, I want everybody to return to your congregations and ask them if such and so. And I'd like, return to what? Because there was no such thing as this monolithic societal group that I belonged to. I didn't belong to a large church. At the time, I belonged to a coven. And as a traditionalist, that meant that, the coven was up to, but never more than 13 members. So, yeah, I could ask maybe the members of my own coven, but that didn't quite that didn't quite cover all of the other covens in Kansas City. So yeah, there was never any way to do that for me, and it was always kind of funny. So
I one individual a few years ago, he goes, "I'm Wiccan," and I go, "Oh, you're a witch," and he took offense at me for saying that.
yeah, I've had that happen.
Wait a minute, we're both one and the same. But he got butthurt about it, and I just didn't understand it.
Some people just don't understand that the word witchcraft comes from the old word Anglo-Saxon word Wicca. It's Saxon, it's Old English, and I wrote an essay about this some years ago called "A Witch by Any Other Name," and I published it originally on the website. I don't know if anybody will remember the website called The Witch's Voice, that was run by two very good friends of mine, Ren Walker and the late Fritz Jung. And at the time, it was the largest pagan website on the internet. And I was kind of amused and honored that essay became their most popular, most frequently read essay for quite some time, because it deals with the I'm kind of an amateur linguist, so I was very much into finding out where the word WICCA or WICCE came from. And no, it was not spelled WICA. That was one of the mistakes or whatever that Gerald Gardner introduced into this mess. Professor Tolkien, I noted in that same essay that Tolkien had used the word WICCA in his marginalia when he was writing The Two Towers, which Christopher Tolkien revealed in his 12-volume set on the history of Middle-earth. So the word WICCA had never gone out of style, as far as I know, or had never sunk to the point where nobody knew what it was. Scholars, at least, still knew what it was, and they knew it meant witch or wizard, because Tolkien translated that word as wizard in his writings, and so he realized that probably for a man it would be wizard, and for a woman it would be witch. Fascinating stuff. And if you want to, I did not include that essay in my book. So if you want to read it today, you'll have to go to my website, but it's on my website.
And that is right below us here, witchessabbath.com, right?
You got it.
Definitely something I'm like writing little notes off to the side on like things. I'm like, okay, maybe look into this or keep that in mind. And now I'm like, okay, website for us.
See, as the tech guy,
By the way, I just recently finished doing a major update to that website, because a friend of mine named Chris was kind of poking me with her elbow, saying, "Why don't you bring your website into the 21st century, Mike?" Because my original website was written in HTML, and I had written it myself using this not an authoring tool, but actually a something that comes with every Windows system called Notepad. And I wrote the whole website on that, believe it or not.
Well,
So,
back
that sounds like pain.
Well, actually, once you learn the HTML tags, it wasn't really too bad. But of course, now they have all of these authoring drag and drop interfaces that you can create websites using that, and I couldn't master those, so Chris had to do that for me. But she did a grand job, and I think it looks better than it's ever looked before, and now it looks just as good on a phone, which I had not even considered before that. But she said, "You're losing 80% of your audience because not everybody has computers now. They look at stuff on phones." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I think you're right."
So our next question is, can you explain a little bit about your book, The Witches' Sabbaths, and tell us why it's still prevalent today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. that book was never meant to be a book. I never set out to be an author. It kind of happened because during the time that I had my bookstore here in Kansas City, the Magic Lantern, I was teaching my witchcraft classes there. I had originally started them in 1970 when I was a freshman in college at Columbia, Missouri. But then I moved to Kansas City in 76 and started teaching here. And I had two of my students come up to me. They were starting a pagan journal at the time called The Rune. And they asked me, would I mind? They knew my thing was the holidays. So they asked me, would I mind writing articles for each of the 8 holidays as they rolled around for each, because they were publishing on that same schedule, 8 issues per year. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. And so I started writing those individual Sabbath articles and publishing them in the Rune. And then later I expanded them and published them in my newsletter that we did at the store called the Lantern's Light. And of course, the logo for that was the hermit from the tarot cards with the hermit holding his lantern. And so, yeah, they came out there, and I also put them on in the early days of the internet. Before the World Wide Web, there was something called a BBS system, or bulletin board system, where computers would dial each other in the middle of the night to take advantage of the lower long distance rates. And they would then forward the entire message base or database or whatever they had to the next computer along the line. And it was an amazing technology. I could write a letter to somebody like on the West Coast and have, they would see it and answer my letter, my email, it was called, and they would answer that email, and I would receive a reply from them in a matter of just 3 days. And, that was really something. Well, what happened was I put all my Sabbath articles on that website, and they were seen. They ended up getting spread all around the world and translated into French and German and all kinds of other languages. And before long, I had a publisher who came to me, and actually, you may know her, Ellen Cannon Reed, who wrote some books in the witchcraft. She was starting her own publishing house, and she contacted me. She was one of those people who got one of my letters in 3 days. And she wrote back and said, I'm starting my own publishing house and I would like to publish your articles. And I said, sure. And so she did. And eventually, though, that was a very small press run. And sadly, she passed away. And my book then languished in not in print for a while. But then I was contacted by another publisher, also from California, saying, "Hey, could we publish your essays? And by the way, do you have any other essays you would like to include?" And I said once again, "Oh, sure." And so that's how I ended up publishing The Witch's Sabbaths. And as to why it's not in print in hard copy anymore. Supposedly, it's supposed to be available on Kindle, but I believe that currently Amazon has dropped the ball on that, and consequently, I have seen copies of the book in hardback form going for like $200 and so forth. And it's just blah. I can't believe it. But I think the reason people like it is because I initially wrote it for an informal audience. It was people who were coming into my bookstore, and it was hopefully written in a style that was entertaining and kind of fun, and didn't take itself too seriously, and was not meant to be deep scholarship kind of thing, but was historical, because I wanted to kind of let people know about. I wanted to look at each holiday and talk about the history and the folklore and the mythology behind each of the holidays. And also I wanted to make the people understand how the holidays connected to one another and how they all fit together like pieces of a puzzle into one grand gestalt. And I think that's why people liked it. They suddenly they saw things that originally they had saw as disparate, separate things, very separate holidays, very separate themes, suddenly clicked together, fell into place, and made sense as a whole. And I think that is a lot of the appeal of the book, and still is.
I still remember, it's actually probably like 2 years ago, maybe. I was moving and I was packing up all my witchy related books. I always keep them all together. And I found notes from when I was like in my later teens. So for me, that like 13, 14 years ago. And I had all these sticky notes hanging out of your book for little references for like if I was going to write a ritual or something for one of the Sabbats. And I was like, okay, go here, this spot. This is why you find a way to like really bring this element into the ritual. And I eventually, a lot of that information got a lot more retained for me. So I ended up taking out all the sticky notes, and I had this, I was just thinking about that the other night prior to this podcast, being like, oh man, I should have just kept those notes. It would have been fun to look back on and just like thumb through the book and just be like, this is what like really like grabbed my attention.
I have a lot of
I was
people,
really starting to take the crafts more seriously.
When I first published, a lot of people would come running up to me and say, "Hey, Mike, I hear you published a book." And my reaction was, "Yeah, read the bibliography, man. It's terrific." And I do. I didn't have a lot of footnotes in the book because, like I said, I originally wrote it for, a very kind of laid back audience that I didn't expect to be terrifically scholarly. But then I realized that caused a problem because people wondered where I got all my information. So I went back and I tried to do a selected bibliography, and people were surprised at just how large a bibliography there was for such a fairly short book, really. And you can live a lifetime in that bibliography, and there's some wonderful sources that go back to the 1800s and the time of the great British folklorists, because that's where I got a lot of my information, the golden age of British folklore. And and then a lot of, I used to go out to Amazon to read my reviews because every author does that. And one of the ones I found most hysterical was somebody said, "I do not like this book because there's nothing in here telling me what to do for my next Sabbath." I'm like, exactly.
I think that's what I love about it, though, because it allows me to, kind of have the meat of it, and then to start building upon it and start developing and start thinking about what you said. And then, that's kind of the beauty about furthering your path within, witchcraft, is that you get handed like seeds of knowledge, and then you start building upon those, and you pick up another book, or you start doing your own research, or you do a meditation. And I think that's one of the things I loved about your book, is just because you didn't necessarily tell me what to do.
Right, and that's exactly what I intended. And so I was ecstatic to see that review like that, even though it was like a 1-star review. But it's like, yes, you're meant to go look at what all the tradition, all the folklore, and there's rich folklore behind every one of the Sabbats. And folk traditions and mythological characters that are related to each of the holidays. And just if you know those traditions, you can write your own rituals, which will be more meaningful to you because they're yours.
I think a lot of people miss that point, though. It's like teaching people. I want them to look at everything that I say as a blatant lie and to prove me wrong. It's the same point with this book here. It's a very enriching historical text to me, because not only did you show a little bit of, per se, a tradition, but you showed many different Sabbats within your book. And I think that's very important because we have to blaze our own trails. Our rituals, it's like Raven Gramassi, one of my teachers, he taught me to look at a ritual and make it your own.
Yep. You have to do that.
Well, I think that's a dying art, unfortunately, is that there's, to speak broadly, there's an entire generation that solely uses other people's works, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But they're not creating their own work. They're just following everything that they find in a book, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Because I love the art of creating spells, like studying the magical theory, the ritual formulas.
Yeah, what are the correspondences? You need to know that.
Yeah. And that's my bread and butter. Like, as somebody who practices in a folk tradition, like the folk formulas, at least in my tradition, like I can give you the formula basis and you make the formula. Here's the structure, make your poem. Go do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's not going to work for you. You got to make it.
Right. That's so true. So true.
And then our next question, let's see here. So your book seems more historical than theological. In your practice of the craft, where should today's witches seek information? Well, you said you just updated your website, right?
Yeah, I did. And yeah, I still have my original bibliography for my witchcraft class on that, and those are all older books, but I think they're all very solid. So I've split them up into different categories. Like, these books are about traditional witchcraft. These books are about feminist witchcraft. These books are about divination. These books are about psychical abilities. These books, and so you can get some of the best books you can find in any of those subject areas by looking at that bibliography. So I would say that. But getting back to the question about theology versus praxis, I guess. That is an interesting one for me because, like I said, I was raised Catholic, so I was raised I was very aware of the theological dimension of anything that I did in life. But I don't think that is typically the case with most folk religions. I think I noticed, for example, that when Stuart Farrar wrote his seminal book, What Witches Do, he very cleverly called it What Witches Do, not What Witches Believe or anything like that, because that would stray into theology. But saying What Witches Do is exactly what it needs to say, because it's what witches, our rituals, our spells, our incantations, our what incense we use, which color candles for what, all of that is almost more important than, all of these discussions about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And that's not to say that witchcraft doesn't have a theology. It does. But like most folk religions, the theology wasn't in the foreground. It was background material. And because I was raised Catholic, I found myself starting to articulate what that theology might be. And another one of the essays, which you would find not in my book but on my webpage, is I think I was about 65 years old when I wrote it, and I finally got to that point in life where I thought, I've been dealing with theological questions all my life. It's finally time for me to write a position paper. So I wrote an essay called God and Me, which I think I stole the title kind of from Groucho Marx, a paraphrase from him. And it's really my theological reflections about what witches might believe, or at least what this particular witch, me, believes about, quote, the God thing. And I'm using finger quotes. You can't see that, but it's a very, very large topic, but one of endless fascination for me. Needless to say, I do not go along with any patriarchal monotheism, like I mentioned before, but that leaves the question, what is it? And basically it comes down to more or less pantheistic views on my part, and the belief that the total summation of what we call nature, or the universe itself, beyond the nature of this planet, beyond our own ecosphere, but everything that exists put together is what I would call, quote, God/goddess. Because it's important not to give that divinity, that one, all, whatever it is, you don't assign a gender to that, because it has all genders in it. Just like you don't assign a moral position for that, because it doesn't have, it's not immoral, but it is amoral. It is neither good nor bad, because it contains both. I mean, it just depends on how you interpret something. You can love a thunderstorm, but if lightning strikes and sets your house on fire, it's not going to be too cool. Or if there's a tornado, those things we interpret as evil, bad things. But to nature, no, it's not. And it's just how nature manifests itself. And for myself, that's what I connect to when I'm thinking about, connecting with the God force. And by the way, I should say I probably don't do that very often, because usually when I'm doing a spell, let's say I'm doing a healing spell for somebody, I don't try to connect to the all, the one, or whatever, because I know that it has not just healing within it, but also sickness. It has not just life, but also death. It has growth and decay. It has all of those things. All dualities are in it. And so when I'm doing a healing spell, I don't just I don't call upon the whole thing, but I only call on that tiny facet of it that has to do with healing and not with sickness. And, I could maybe do an incantation that says, oh, great part of the force that has to do with healing and not with sickness, but that's a little verbose, a little cumbersome. So I give it a name. I might say, if I was in a Christian tradition, I might invoke Raphael or whomever. If I was in the Welsh tradition, which I am, I might invoke the god of Mathon. And because he was the god of healing, and so forth and so on. Every tradition has its own god or goddess of healing, and that's my shorthand. And for invoking just that part of the force that has to do with healing. And now here comes the funny part. Sometimes when you do that, you get a response from the universe that feels like you are speaking to a Mathon, or and you might get a vision of that particular god or goddess. You might even hear their voice. You might get feedback, and that's cool. That's what, to me, that's what religion is. It comes from the same root as relinking, ligature. That's religion, relink. And so you are connecting the healing forces inside of you with the healing forces that are out there in the universe. And that connection is the conduit down which the healing energies flow, or up which they flow. That's how you really can generate power. That makes sense?
Does to me.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. I was just dissecting, and I'm sitting there like, okay, yeah, yeah.
Mike, I would love to sit in your classes while you're going through all of this. It's truly amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I did it for a long time. Like I said, I started teaching when I was a freshman in college in 1970. And I didn't quit until 1989. So 20 years of teaching every semester. And I include the summer semester. I didn't take any time off. So in that 20 years, I taught 3 semesters per year. Each semester had 12 weeks. So there were 12 classes per semester. Each one of those was about 2 hours long, but I always went overtime. I was usually about 3 hours. And in each class, I had anywhere between 30 and 60 people. So in terms of FaceTime instruction, teacher to student, I had a friend of mine who used to write for the Llewellyn, I think it was called the Llewellyn New Times. She, Stephanie Fox, calculated that she thought I had done more face-to-face teacher student hours than maybe any other witchcraft instructor alive. And if that's true, I'm very honored because it's fun. I mean, when I was teaching the class, I'm a ham. Let's face it, I'm a natural ham. And to me, it's the whole idea of teaching is a performance art. So yeah, I like to have fun with it, but also get serious with it too. And I always had such great classes, and it's cliche, but it's true. I learned as much from my students as they did from me, and that's how it should be.
Yeah. That for me, for 30 some odd years, I'm an infant compared to you. That one of the greatest things was the questions that were asked that made me think.
Oh yeah.
To ponder, how relevant is this within my spiritual path? What can I learn from it? And a lot of times it took me on a tangent that was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I can imagine how it was for you with that many people.
Yeah. The more perspective you can, different perspectives that can talk to a particular topic, the more you're going to get out of it.
Oh yeah, that's why I absolutely love doing these.
Yeah.
Is that we get people in different traditions and different paths and get to pick their brain. It's my favorite thing.
Yep.
Yeah. I kind of look at it this way. My path has led me from being a traditional witch to be an eclectic mutt, because you can't help but have these different traditions influence your magical practice.
Sure.
You can't unlearn something.
Yeah. Once it's there, it's stuck.
Yep.
Well, anyway. Well, go ahead, Nico. Go ahead.
I think that there is a rise in eclecticism, which is interesting to see. That there is a lot more practitioners who don't necessarily adhere to a specific tradition.
And I have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I have.
On the one hand, well, to me, it's the difference between breadth and depth. The people who follow an eclectic path are very good about breadth, and there's much to be said for that. But at the same time, I kind of worry that people today are not taking the time to follow one path deeply. And that's
I can agree with that.
That's a whole different experience. To really, really research a particular path and kind of take it all the way home, if you know what I mean. And I think too few people, because honestly, I think it's harder to do the depth stuff than it is the eclectic stuff. The eclectic stuff, you just gather, whatever falls in front of you. But to follow one particular path and learn it really well, that's almost becoming a lost art. I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree.
And on top of that, just kind of adding, I feel that when you start picking up whatever suits your needs, which I think is kind of what it boils down to a lot with being eclectic, but you start to slowly lose, I feel, the deeper parts of a particular tradition because people aren't pursuing that. And, it's very well known that, what is remembered lives on. And if you don't take the time to remember it, to let it go through, to practice it, to pass it on to others, then it's going to fade.
Yes.
And, there's more and more books out there that they go over some things, but they don't go over things deeply. And that's also, adhering to a lot of our oaths. But it's how is this information going to continue forward?
Yeah, you asked me a little bit ago what books or whatever I would recommend today, and I'm always stymied by that question because I don't read many witchcraft books today, because I find that it's just a continual kind of rehashing of the same material over and over and over and over and over. And by my age, I'm 72 years old now. It takes me, it's kind of, it takes me so many books to read just to read one new thing. It's almost not worth the trouble. And so I don't. I don't read a lot of new stuff, and then therefore when somebody says, "What book should I read?" I have no idea.
Right.
Well, I feel like that's pretty common for people that are in traditions. That once you're comfortable within your tradition and you're excelling at it, like, you have your grimoire, your book of shadows, like your source materials. You're firmly in your tradition. Like, you don't need to go that far out of your tradition unless there's some groundbreaking, like, crazy new thing out there, and it's becoming less common.
Yeah.
And I find that in my practice too, where most of what I read anymore is
it's diminishing returns.
Yeah, historical witchcraft, like starter books on other traditions, new cultures that are coming out in publications, just so that if somebody needs me to point them in a direction, I can be like, hey, I don't know enough about that, but here's a starting point.
I find that now I'm focusing more on when it comes to books and expanding my knowledge, with not being able to have like a face-to-face with a person that knows something about whatever path I'm trying to kind of wiggle down or knowledge I'm trying to obtain. I'm trying to focus more on the breadcrumbs that are within folk traditions, within history, within the time periods, and that's currently where I'm at. Because I give a lot of that advice to even my students and some of my peers, is that I feel like once you start hitting that block where it seems like every book you pick up is the same information, you start looking at the bibliographies, you start looking at the history of the time frame, you start going down rabbit holes of searches with just like one key term, and you just keep going, because there's bound to be more information. It's not going to be labeled witchcraft. And that's where I'm at.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've often said that people probably would learn more if they walk right past the witchcraft section in the bookstore and go to the sections on folklore and the sections on comparative mythology and things like that. You'll learn a lot. I mean, I learned a whole lot when I walked into the local. There's a local store here in Kansas City that's all Catholic stuff. And there's nothing but Christianity stuff in there, of course. But if you know how to read between the lines, you can learn a lot, because there's a whole section of book on liturgics. And these people are talking about liturgical history, liturgical aesthetics, liturgical, what else? Every possible aspect of liturgy is covered by liturgical historians.
Mhm.
And some of the questions that arise in magic have been faced along the line by Catholic theologians who are interested in liturgics. And lo and behold, I've found answers there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you can look in all kinds of places.
I think that with a lot of people, they skip over tradition, but they don't understand the importance of magical structure.
Yeah.
Like me, it was a long period in time where, if a witch was oath bound, they couldn't really enlighten you into the way of the craft.
Yeah.
And we miss that structure, that connection with the divine through ritual and what
Right.
we learn through it, and not to mention that you're building alignments, you're flexing your etherical muscles, you're learning the craft, you're learning about ebb and flow, how to project, how to manifest. And a lot of that stuff is being skipped over. People are like, I read one book and I know it all.
Yeah. Read
That's
one book and you're a high priest or high priestess.
the
Sorry.
instant gratification, like 5-minute witch things, which it is also another intriguing phenomena that the newer generations have, is that it's so weird for me being in the middle ground of, like, I learn through texts and people, and I now have students that have never cracked open a book on witchcraft history before they met me.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that they've learned through media sources, TikTok, YouTube, things like that. And I mean, there's some fantastic teachers,
Sure.
but there's so much misinformation.
Yeah.
And so much spiritual psychosis.
Yeah. I know, and I know we're starting to sound like a bunch of old fogies that are swinging our canes at the younger generations, and I just really hate that because I've always felt such a strong attachment to younger folks. I mean, who was I teaching in my class? It was all newbies,
Yeah.
And I loved that. But I have to face the fact that what I call witchcraft has changed so much over the years that I'm having a harder time now connecting with younger people. Like you said, the instant gratification thing, attention span is getting to be a real problem. I'm hearing more and more that kids today just can't hold their attention long enough to read a whole book or even watch a whole movie. I don't know what to do about that. Or should I be concerned about that? I don't know. I don't even know at this point.
I've seen the data even on our page. Like, there's the thing called YouTube Shorts, and I break down the podcasts at like highlight points and upload like a minute 30 video. And those do better than the whole podcast episodes.
I bet.
And it just blew my mind where I was like, I mean, I try to make them as educational as possible, but I'm sitting there like, I have a whole like 2-hour video for you to like listen to while you do anything else. And you go for the one, like the minute 30, which is just fascinating. But that's why I break them up too.
And I'm even worse because, I can read a book-length bibliography and really enjoy it.
I know.
Doesn't have to have a plot or characters. It's just a bibliography.
One of my favorite witchcraft books is called the Svarta Bokkonster, which is a book. It translates to the Black Book, which is a collection of Dutch folklore books from the 14th through the early 19th century.
Oh, and wonderful!
It's all academic. So
right.
It's a slow read. It's methodical. There's tons of footnotes.
Are the Grimm brothers in there by any chance?
Yes.
Would
They
imagine.
have to be.
Right. And they, there you go. Who was the first person to posit that modern witchcraft was the remnants of the old pre-Christian religion of Northwestern Europe? It wasn't Margaret Murray. It was Jacob Grimm.
Yeah. Well, the amusing thing, Hulda from the Brothers Grimm stories has revitalized in modern times, which is I absolutely love because she's a fantastic deity. But I've heard of multiple people who are working with her now, and she's a story of a witch that lives in a well out of the Brothers Grimm stories from an alpine goddess in German mythology.
Wonderful.
And I was like, people still worship her? Like, this is cool.
Yeah.
Like a small town, like a small southern German town, folk goddess is still being worshipped in modern times. And it just blew my mind. And I was like, I love this.
Yep. And some things do catch on. I mean, like we were talking about Krampus earlier, and he was, Austrian, German, all those countries. So, yeah. And he's more popular in the United States today than ever before.
Oh, yeah. Minnesota, if I remember right, has a Krampus festival.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple places that do, they have a big, huge, holiday for it.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah. Yep. There. I was just looking here to see where the settlements are in the United States. I don't know there are certain states, that are more heavily settled by German people, and
Midwest, Texas.
Yeah, from Hungary, Slovenia, all the places that do celebrate Krampus. So, yep.
It's beautiful though, just seeing those traditions carry through and people getting more and more involved and just keeping it carried on throughout the traditions and their different generations and their communities. And I'm a huge history nut, so I love seeing that stuff getting carried forward.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's the Witches Dance too, which I think they also do in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Which I really want to go see at some point. It's hundreds of people dressed up as folkloric witches with brooms, and they dance through the streets and sweep the evil out. And it's such a cool little folk tradition, and it's I love you so much.
Yeah, it's really going back to the roots when you see something like that. And Amber, you were just saying that you like history so much, and when people ask me today, what have I been reading, and they expect me to answer with something about Wicca or something supernatural stuff, and the answer is no. I'm reading more history and linguistics. That's my other hobby horse. Than anything else right now. I just love reading, and that was not always the case. When I was younger, I was not interested in history, and I think people really need to get a certain number of years on them before they really start to appreciate history. At least that was the case with me, and so that's what I really love reading about now.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think with me, I'm really big into ancestry research. And I like to, work my way back, but then I like to think about that ancestor and what they were experiencing. And then I start looking up events and whatever city or area they lived in, what made them move from this area all the way over across the state. And then, just kind of working my way back. And then eventually you start finding historical text.
Sure.
Kind of in the Massachusetts, even when my ancestors came over, there's this sweet spot in kind of this mid 1600s where records were just very well kept. And it's I could see every single job that my 14th great grandfather held, and that to me is just amazing because I go 3-4 generations back and I have no idea besides that this person lived in this state. And it's just amazing to see that. And then, yeah, I like looking up time frames, and I'm a big coin collector too. So even just, holding that piece in time and really going forward with it, I don't know, it's all beautiful to me. And then finding that kind of stuff to relate to spirituality and religion, and then just branching, it's, you just keep going.
Well, I think that's what really changed my practice, is that I was adopted, got in touch with my biological family, and then started really doing the ancestry. My biological father gave me a packet, a bunch of family photos, and ancestry as far back as he had done. And then it's like, okay, well, I have a starting point. So I took their side back, and then I asked my biological mother, like, hey, who's past your parents? Because I can't find much. And just dig into it. And then just so many cans of worms and so many rabbit holes. And I think the coolest thing was finding out that there were other practitioners in the family, like folk practitioners. And that I have like a whole bibliography of my great-great-grandmother, who was a folk practitioner, and she was Dutch. And just her entire obituary is just her dogging on like organized religion and being like, I'll never trust it, and I live by the farmer's almanac, and the plants and nature. I love this woman, and it's just so humorous.
It's kind of, you're reminding me of my grandmother too. I told you she grew up in the Ozarks, and years later when I read Vance Randolph's classic Ozark Magic and Folklore, I swear it was like sitting at my grandma's knee again, listening to her talk, reading through those pages, and all that lore was still there. It was wonderful.
I had this similar thing with my adoptive family. My grandmother was in the Ozark folk tradition as well.
Oh.
And I was one of two people to really pick up on it. And it drove me nuts trying to figure out what does grandma do? Because clearly grandma's a witch, but she goes to church. But also I guess I asked the right question. So I started getting the answers. And years after my grandma had passed away, I was having a conversation with Amber and later my mom, and I was like, because I'm their cousin, and it's like, did your grandma do these things too? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, it's folk magic. Her grandmas were folk practitioners. And it just slowly skid under everybody's noses.
Yeah.
But it drove me nuts trying to figure out what it was for the longest time, because there was no name to it. And at the time, hoodoo was the folk tradition that everybody wrote about.
Yeah.
And it was well, it could be hoodoo, but grandma's not the right demographic to practice hoodoo.
Right. It's interesting. Genealogical stuff is so important to most traditional societies as well. They really focus on that and keep that alive. We're not doing that anymore. Or very few of us, I should say, are doing that.
Mike, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
With all the people that you've taught, what was the most magical moment for you during that time period when he was teaching?
Well, that's a good question. And I think I don't know if there's any one moment, but there is one type of moment. And as a teacher, probably most teachers know this moment. It's when you're talking on a subject and you say something, that some little detail or other that for them makes the penny drop, and you see it in their eyes. You just see this sudden awareness of oh, I get it now. That's something I've been thinking about and wondering about my whole life, and now you've said something that enables me to grasp that, that is the magical moment for me.
Yeah.
And it happened repeatedly, thankfully. It's wonderful.
Well, that's good though.
Yeah.
I find the same thing when I'm teaching, especially out in public, and you're sitting there talking, and all of a sudden you see somebody, just a big smile just go across their face, and you see their aura just flourish.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where they, after you're through talking, they walk up to you and
they come running up. Yep.
Thank you. And for me, it's like, what did I do? Like, what did I say? And they expand upon it. And
that's really, I think, the most, gratifying reward you could ever ask for. No monetary recompense would ever match that. It's just the greatest thing to know you've been able to contribute to somebody's life like that. And that's just, it's funny too, because I never thought I was going to be a teacher. My mother was a teacher. She taught fourth grade virtually all her life, and all my life, certainly. And when I was growing up, she kept saying, "Whatever you do, Mike, don't be a teacher." After I started teaching, I could kill her, because it was like I realized I'd found the one thing that I was best at, and so yeah, I can understand her frustration with maybe teaching fourth graders, because I tended, even in college, I made the mistake of always kind of gravitating to the kids who are the brightest and the most engaged, and they, ones who are not taking the class just for the credit, but they were really interested. And that feedback of like you say, of that instant recognition of their affirmation that somehow something I said put it all in place for them, is just those greatest moments you can have.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
And I never taught for money. I know that's, again, there's another controversial area we could get into, but when I first started, there was this pervasive thought that you didn't share sacred knowledge for money. That would be cheapening the craft. And so I never took a penny for any of those years, those 20 years plus, really, because I continued to do lectures and stuff after the 20 years of classes and podcasts and other things. But no, I would not consider being paid for that. And in fact, when I first published my book, one of the things that both publishers, I said, well, I'll do that. Yeah, you can publish my book, but I have a website, and most of this stuff is already on the website. I've had people tell me they printed out. They had their dot matrix printers back then. They printed out every one of my articles and bound them into a book of their own. And I said, that's wonderful. And I don't want to take down my website just because I'm publishing a book, because I never intended to publish a book. And, to their credit, both of my publishers agreed to this. Because they had me go around when I was doing lectures around the country and book signings and stuff. And I would say, would you still, want to buy a book, even though all this same material is available for free on the web? And a lot of them said, yeah, we'd still want the book. And so I reported that back to them, and they're like, okay, you can leave your website up. And that's what I did.
Bless you for that. That's really cool, because I've never charged for classes. I never have.
Yeah.
If you're sincere of heart and you are serious, and if I saw goodwill toward you, I would help a person out, help them understand the wheel of the year, the doing magic. It was very important for me. But now I got another question for you.
Sure.
Would you ever consider expanding your book?
Well, I have thought about that, but the sources that I used, so many of them came from the time when I was back in college. And I don't know where a lot of modern academia is with those sources. And I'm kind of off into other areas right now, so probably not. The thing I've turned my attention to more recently, beyond updating my webpage, is that I've been working in the area. And, I told you I used to be a professor of parapsychology at UMKC. So I've gotten more involved in field research in parapsychology. And I know that always comes across as kind of odd because, unfortunately, when people think of ghost hunters, they think of these ridiculous TV shows that are out there where, yeah, I know you've seen them where somebody sees something move in a haunted house and they go, "Oh my God, let's get out of here!" They all run. It's like, what are you there for? But no, I was really interested in doing some scientific research into investigating houses that had purported disturbances in them. And I fell in with a group of people out of Illinois who were also kind of taking a scientific. I went to a local Paracon, they called it, paranormal convention here in Kansas City, and I didn't really think I was going to like going to it, but it ended up being right next to where in a hall, right in a Masonic lodge, right next to where I lived. So I thought, oh, I'll wander over there, see what it's like. And there was this one group that was really into doing their investigation scientifically. And so I got together with them, and one of my passions has always been to see if I could do any correlation studies of random number generators with things that happen in purportedly haunted houses. Now, this was inspired by the work of Roger Nelson at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, or PAIR Laboratories, with something called the Global Consciousness Project. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. Yeah, everybody in the audience raise their hands if you. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, the idea was to take random number generators, place them all over the globe, and of course these little machines do exactly what the name implies. They sit there cranking out a continuous data stream of ones and zeros, and they're completely random. And there are mathematical tests that you can do on these streams of numbers to make sure that they're random and that there's no patterns or any kind of coherence in the stream. But they wanted to know, if by chance there was something that happened on the world stage that was really big, that commanded everybody's attention and everybody's thought process or consciousness was suddenly converging onto one particular event. So instead of going about their day-to-day lives, there was suddenly a coherence of their thought. Would that tend to correlate to any anomalous readings from the random number, or RNG, as we call it? And it turns out that it does. And the Global Conscious Project has been running for quite a number of years, and they've got hits on things like, I think, an early one was the O.J. Simpson trial, where the verdict was announced, and they got a spike in anomalous readings at that point. During the funeral of Princess Diana, at certain points they got spikes. But of course, the parade example was the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when suddenly the entire world was focused on what was happening here in New York, or in the United States in New York. And if you look at the graphs of what happened with their random number generators, it just is off the charts. And what is really interesting is that it started, all of this anomalous readings started to, you can see the rise, the curve, the rise in the data, or the graph, of the data happening. It starts to rise about 2 hours before the first plane hit the first building. Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
What does that imply? there are a lot of theories. Nobody knows for sure, but we do know that by that time, the plan was already in motion. Maybe that was it. People were already starting to hijack airplanes. But or could it be that people all around the world had some premonition that something bad was about to go down, and that premonition alone was enough to trigger some response? Or I can't say cause. Correlation is not causation, but there was definitely a correlation between the anomalous outputs in the random number generators and the experience of 9/11. So my thought was, what would happen if I scaled this down and took a random number generator into a haunted house? Would anomalous readings on the RNG correspond to paranormal events as reported by the investigators in the haunted house? So we did this, and the first investigation we did. Now, I should do. The team that I'm working with out of Illinois is called the Paranormal Research Institute. So shout out to any of those guys who are any of my team members who are listening. They weren't my team members yet. I hadn't joined the group at that time, but they were already doing data logging with their investigations and time stamping anything that happened. Anytime anybody reported any kind of anomalous event in the haunted house, they would, using internet time servers, they would get an exact time stamp of when that occurred and log it. And I thought, this is the group I need to work with. So I teamed up with them and we did an investigation. And I don't know how. This is where I'm going to lose most of your audience.
You're fine. You're fine. It's interesting.
I'm going to start talking about statistics. Okay, bear with me. How many do any of you have background in statistics at all? Especially probability statistics, which is the worst.
I've heard people talk about it, but I get lost in it.
All right, just a real quick kind of overview of what it means to be statistically significant. Probability is measured typically somewhere between 1 and 0 with a p-value. A p-value of 1 means that something is definitely going to happen. A p-value of 0 means there's no way this is going to happen. So probability is measured somewhere between certainty and no. Absolutely not. So, if you're flipping a coin, say, your p-value is 0.5 because there is a 50% chance that the coin is going to come down heads or tails, right?
Yeah.
So in science, the typical measure of statistical significance is a p-value of 0.05, which means that you would get this outcome only one time in 20 just by chance. And that is the number that is typically used in pharmaceutical trials and lots of other areas in science, because that's usually the break point. Some areas like parapsychology generally use a slightly higher bar and want to go to 0.01 so that something would happen only 1 in 100 times by chance. So anyway, we did this experiment 7 hours long, breaking the whole night down into 3-minute increments. And so anytime that the RNG had an anomalous event and started spewing out non-random patterns, it would timestamp that automatically. And if one of our investigators reported something that was paranormal within that 3-minute window, then if that was it obviously wasn't going to work to use a 2-hour time frame like they did at 9/11. So I thought just 3 minutes. If it's 3 minutes, that's close enough. And so we did that by breaking the entire 7-hour investigation down into 3-minute windows all the way. I can't remember. It was something like 360 some 3-minute segments. And then we looked at it using what's called a chi-square analysis that measures how can I explain this? How significant it was that these two things occurred within 3 minutes of one another. And of course, you have some 3-minute windows where you have an anomalous reading from the RNG, but no paranormal hit, and you have some 3-minute readings where you have a paranormal hit but no RNG hit. So, and then you have some 3-minute windows where you have neither, but the ones you're looking for is the ones where you have both. So you've got 4 possible conditions. So you do a 2x2 matrix and evaluate that with a chi-square evaluation. So I would have been happy to have gotten a result of anything that was statistical significance, like 0.05. That would have been scientifically significant. I would have been happy with that. Obviously, the smaller the number, the greater the statistical significance is. So when we got our raw data, we handed it over to an independent researcher, Dave Schumacher, who took it, and he's really great with statistics. His background is in that, and parapsychology. And he took a look at it. He called me back after a few days and said, Mike, you better sit down. I said, okay. He said, I'm going to be honest with you. When you first told me about this zany idea of yours, I really didn't think there was anything to it. I didn't think we were going to find anything. However, I was wrong. He said, your p-value is 0.00001. Now, in gamblers' terms, that means that our result would have happened by chance only 1 in 100,000 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing, nor could anybody else on our team. We all, especially me, walked around in a daze for a whole week at least. And I have since written a magazine article about it that was published by the Psychical Research Society of London, which is the oldest parapsychology organization in the world. And we are currently working on a scientific paper that covers not only that experiment, but 2 more that we've also had. It wasn't quite as high as that, but still, I think our lowest one was like, it would have happened by chance only 8 times out of 100,000. So we're still way, way, way beyond what anybody could have possibly wanted or asked for. I'm just, I just can't believe this. So we're pretty sure we're going to get a scientific paper published on it. And
That's awesome.
yeah, that's just one of the other. See, I have to tell people I don't always wear the same hat. Sometimes it's not the pointy hat, but so this is more of I think a tweed jacket with arm patches, elbow patches.
It's like the academic side pocket, the hat's in the back pocket.
That's it.
Like the parapsychology and the paranormal are the sidestep to witchcraft practices, because they cross, but
they do, because it's traditional that witches and traditional societies were the ones asked to come and investigate any kind of haunting or paranormal occurrence. So yeah, they do.
I think it's amazing how the modern witch is included in banishings. How we do a house and we figure out where the energy points are, which people know as portholes, how we are used to seal it, or to banish a spirit totally out of the house.
Right.
I think it goes hand in hand, Mike, personally.
Oh, I do too. And one of
the
things that came up in the experimental protocol was, which Dave Schumacher asked me, was how are you going to experimentally define a paranormal event? I mean, is it going to be just if somebody feels the hairs rise on their arm or what? And it took me almost a week to realize, no, we didn't have to pass judgment on the paranormal event. All we had to do was measure when somebody thought they had a paranormal event and deemed it strong and significant enough to them to raise their walkie-talkie and report it back to our command center. So we're really measuring a human behavior at that point, and we're correlating their behavior with the random number generator output. And so, it was like, I don't care what paranormal event is. I mean, it could be the hair raising on their arms, or they could be looking through a portal at all the demons of hell. I don't care. My only question is, what time did it happen?
Give me the data.
If it happens within 3 minutes of the RNG going off the beam, then I've got something.
Well, that's the science side of it, where it's like,
right.
I'm glad you're okay. Did it show up?
Yeah, exactly. right. And the wonderful thing about this is it can be easily adapted to pretty much any amateur ghost hunting group. If they take on the same model or protocol for their experiment, and they timestamp everything and they use a random number generator, they can be citizen scientists, and they can contribute to our knowledge and understanding of parapsychology.
I might look into that.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Do amateur paranormal investigations, and that would be so much. It adds another level to the research and the evidence.
Oh yeah. I mean, if these things really do correlate, maybe at some point they could be the random number generator. And I should stress that sometimes the random number generator would ping before we'd get a report of something paranormal, and sometimes the paranormal report would come in before the random number generator would ping. So you never know. So it can't be causal, because unless the arrow of causation only points one direction, supposedly, unless you're at the quantum level. So
yeah.
So is this quantum? I have no idea, but it's just fascinating work to be doing, and so that's what I've been doing lately.
I think that witchcraft and science go hand in hand.
They're proving so many things that witches have done for so long, and the science is just starting to catch up to some of it, which is super intriguing to be living during that time period and being a witch.
Yeah. Like my grandmother, I know, never worried about proving anything. And she knew what was true and what wasn't, and that was part of her experience. So if somebody said, "I don't believe you," she just shrugged it off. Yeah. But now it was like, I grew up in, with a quote scientific age. So if somebody said they didn't believe me, I was like, well, if there's evidence, if this thing is true, there must be evidence to support it. I'm going to go find out what's in the journals. What's the evidence?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, living in an age of AI, I assume that in the paranormal field, that photos of paranormal evidence or EVs are becoming less credible.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that.
Which is sad, because they're really cool.
I know.
I grew up in a house that was haunted. My parents for a long time didn't believe me, Then, when I moved out on my own and had my own family, I moved into another house, which was, the address was 13. And I ain't going to give the address, but
Mockingbird Lane.
I don't want people running up on the people who owns it now, but there's shadow people in there. There's this big black blob. And if my wife and my friend wasn't there, I thought I was going loco. And that's really before I got into too deep. Well, I shouldn't say too deep. Before I got deep into the craft, it scared the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
It's shown its physical face, and that was back in the early 80s.
That's where you needed a traditional witch or wise woman to tell you what that was and kind of lead you through that what's the word I want? That labyrinth of understanding it. Yeah.
Yeah. Then when we was living out in Colorado, I'd be laying in bed, watch TV, and all of a sudden, I love art. I love to draw. I'm not, I'm worthless as, what on a board, but, I love art. I had this box of crayons sitting up on the sink, and all of a sudden, I'm watching TV and I see this box of crayons lift up and drop on the ground. I'm going, what? I'm not sensing it. Usually I sense stuff like that.
Yeah.
I get up and I go back and I pick it up and I put it back. And I'm sitting there, on the bed. All of a sudden I see it again. I'm like, okay, you got to quit this. I don't know here, but you got to quit. And after that, I didn't have no problems other than our lights flickering once in a while. It was a nice place, nice neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's science, I think, is very prevalent to understanding.
The relationship of science to the supernatural is interesting because one thing that happened to me, I remember when I was still in college, I got, and this goes back to my grandmother and her almanac and full moons and all of that. I had been told that people were more psychic at the time of the full moon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a common folklore belief, that people were more receptive, whatever, psychically receptive. And I thought, well, if that's true, then there ought to be evidence to prove it. So I thought, you know what? We've got years and years worth of ESP card tests archived down at Duke University. So being the novice that I was, I whipped out my pen and paper and I wrote a letter to J.B. Rhine at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and said, is there any evidence that people have higher ESP card testing scores at the time of a full moon? And it would be easy enough to do a retro analysis of that. You got all of those tests are dated. So you take a bunch of tests in one hand and you take some almanacs in the other hand and you compare them, right?
Yeah.
Well, I waited to get an answer and I waited and I waited. No answer came until finally I got a letter from his wife, Louisa Rhine, who is also a well-known and famous parapsychologist in her own right. And her answer to me, and I still wish I had saved the letter. No, I don't have it. But it was one of the most amazing letters I'd ever read. It said, we have never done an analysis of this question because if it turned out to be true, we would be lending credence to astrology, and we don't wish to do that.
Wow.
Now, you have to understand, back in the 70s, parapsychology was struggling so hard to be accepted as part of real science, quote, quote. I mean, they were finally accepted as a member of the American Academy of Scientific, whatever. And so, but it was a hard fight for them to be accepted as part of real science. And a lot of hard-headed scientists who didn't know any better still don't accept parapsychologists as real scientists. So I understand, I get it, but still, what a thing to hear. I mean, what a thing to read.
That's wild.
Well, it's a moment where you're like, there could be a connection. I think there's a connection, and you just don't want to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
I get their part, but it's just, that missing data that I
know
it could have been.
Yeah, it hit me in the gut. It was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. But no, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I really do. So,
I sit there, I'm listening to you, and all of a sudden it's like Lori Cabot and her coven were investigated by the FBI because of the paranormal. And took a picture, National Geographic did, and it was on the cover of National Geographic. You see these blue lines of energy going through the circle. And people sit there and go, that ain't real. What these blue lines are not real.
Mm-hmm.
But for me being a practitioner, that is very real, because I see that when I step into the circle. I go outside and I'm walking around, I get glimpses of blue. Not because I'm staring at the damn sun, because I know better than that. You know, but it's there.
Yeah.
Okay. I sit there when we was with you. You know, that's about the time that I was with the Cabots. And you know, I did my meditations every morning religiously. Before I went to bed, I did my meditations, my alignments.
Mm-hmm.
I woke up that morning when we was taking you to eat pizza, if I remember right. Chrissy took a picture. And within that picture, it showed that what I have seen within the circle, what I saw on the Cabots, you know, front page.
Mm-hmm.
That picture represented that. That, to me, is science. That's verification to me as an individual or practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
That science does play a very big part of the craft.
Yeah.
And parapsychology, you know, it lends credence of a reality.
Yeah.
That what we see, what we feel, you know, you can crunch the numbers all you want. It's the other world is very real.
Yep.
A lot of people don't realize that. But I just
we witches do.
But a lot of people, they just, you know, it's like the argument with quantum physics: is it real or is it not?
Yeah.
I do believe it is. You know, I believe
some people are just spooked by it. You know,
it scares them.
Yeah, the ramifications of acknowledging its existence for some people causes like an identity crisis, or
right.
Like,
well, Albert Einstein famously said he was bothered by the idea of spooky action at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but people like Niels Bohr, they pushed it on through. They knew this is where it had to go.
Yeah. It was like even Tesla with his radio frequency device, and he was picking up disembodied voices.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, they're not English, but I don't know what they are, but they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, you know, we see reality as 3-dimensional. Why don't we look at it as 4-dimensional, 6-dimensional, 7-dimensional? You know, who's to say what happens to us when we sleep? Do we stay in our body or do we astral out? What is? I can look at an item that's behind me and turn my back. Is it still there? You know, those big questions of
the simulation rendering.
Science,
oh God,
knowing. You know, it's fascinating to me.
I saw an argument the other day where this guy, based on probability alone, was arguing for the idea that we're living in a simulation because of the idea that we will progress to the point where we will be able to write simulations that are so, you know, amazingly real. I mean, that you can't tell. You know, basically passes a Turing test of 3-dimensionalism, if I could use that word.
I saw that one too. Yeah, it was really interesting.
And yeah, based on probability, he thinks that the evidence right now is on the side of this being a simulation. And it was the most, again, because I'm into probability, it was the most convincing argument yet that I've seen about this being a simulation.
Yeah, it fascinates me about quantum physics that, they're realizing that, everything is made of carbon, which we've known that for years and years, but that an individual can raise their vibrational rate high enough through doing magical practice that carbon becomes fluid. In other words, you should be able to raise up your vibrational rate high enough where you can step interdimensionally, but also pass it through what we see in this world as, like a desk or a door. It's interdimensional where we can just raise our vibrational rate high enough where we can pass our flesh through what we deem as solid objects that we shouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
In reality, that should be probable.
There's been a lot of interesting studies. There was one on, they did one on the effectiveness of remote prayer and by proxy also like remote spell work, and found that even if the person was unaware that there were measurable changes in the person's electromagnetic output, like essentially their aura reacted and increased in reaction to that as simultaneous stimuli or stimuli.
Excuse me for interrupting, but all kinds of biometric, telemetry changes when other people think at you. When there's intentional thought and galvanic skin response and everything, your blood cell counts, your heart rate, everything.
Oh yeah.
One of the things we would like to do eventually is to actually do biological telemetry with all the people in the haunted house that's doing the investigation.
Ooh. See, I want to see. One of the things, I had a friend mention this to me that I think would be intriguing is to watch, the order photography machines with the plates.
Yeah.
I want to watch the video if they eventually make a video version of these, of somebody who is a psychic vampire feeding off of somebody, and watch the electromagnetic energy exchange.
Yep.
I think that'd be super fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amber, you're being awfully quiet. What are you thinking?
I'm just like absorbing, and then I'm like doing research on things that you guys are saying as you guys are talking.
Okay.
I'm going down rabbit holes as I'm listening, and then you guys are moving on, and I'm like, oh man.
I just don't want to be, taking over the whole thing.
Oh no, you guys are fine. I'm just absorbing and enjoying right now.
Okay.
I have the fantastic thing of I have a key here that I can tag different time marks in this video, so that when I go back and edit it, I can look at the time points and reference things.
I'm like, I'm taking notes and I am looking up things and I'm just diving in and
should have been running the RNG while we're doing this. See if
that would be interesting.
Anomalous. Well, I had some people, another podcast I did recently. Guys were into going out at night and watching the skies for any anomalous thing going on overhead, and they occasionally see things. And they said, it'd be fun if you would come with us sometime with your RNG and see when we see something overhead that we can't explain. Would the RNG go off at the same time? And I thought, yeah, that would be a fun experiment to do. So yeah, hope that happens.
Now, is that a different, is that a full device, or is that just a random number generator? Like I could pull up an app and...
No. The random number generators, this is another rabbit hole, I'm afraid, but you have to have what's called true random number generation, TRNG, as opposed to PRNG, or pseudo random number generation. If you're familiar with computer coding at all, you know that most programming languages have a random function. Yep. And you seed that function with a number, and based on what the seed number is, then it'll start spitting out a stream of so-called random numbers. But if you give it the same seed, it'll spit out that same stream every time. So it's predictable. It's not truly random. So you have to have a random source for your random number generator. In our case, the source we're using, you mentioned Tesla a bit ago, and background radiation and so forth. We're using the background radiation static, basically, that's left over from the Big Bang, that's out there all the time as our source of randomness. And any device with an RF chip basically can pick it up, because if you tune, you remember if you had an old FM radio and you tune between the stations where there's no signal, that's what you're listening to, is the background radiation sound of the universe.
I got one.
Yeah, there you go. And if you can find a way to turn that static, that noise, into a stream of ones and zeros, you're there. You've got a true random number generator.
Okay.
And there are other ways to do it too. There's a place online I know that provides random number generators to organizations, and it's based on a whole wall full of lava lamps and laser beams that are shooting through on a grid that shoot through the lava lamps, and it's totally random. There's no way to predict that.
Huh.
So it can go from the sublime to the funny, but that's random.
Oh man.
To me, I almost think of the RNG as I'm getting metaphorical here, but it's almost like a device that can measure a disturbance in the force.
Yeah, I could see that, because people, we think of that with synchronicities too, where people see repetitive numbers for different things, different sequences we've decoded different associations with.
Right. Everybody, I think notices those kind of recurring patterns.
It just makes me. I think I'm kind of going on the spinning, I guess I'm having right now. Is it makes me wonder if you did something that in your meditation work or ritual work or just different times of the year, different locations, just all the different variations. It just kind of makes me. I don't know. I guess that's what I'm wondering in my head right now. I'm just kind of going oh, I'd love to see. When you have a really good guided meditation, and kind of how right when people get kind of sync kind of within themselves, it just makes me wonder what the different numbers would be around those times.
Yes.
Oh yeah, World Meditation Day, where you get hundreds of thousands of people meditating in sync. That'd be then you get my wheels turning.
Yeah, that'd be another good test for the RNG.
I remember one. I was talking to my first high priestess, and she was, teaching people how to create energy balls, and she wanted me and Gypsy to come into her class, just like we're doing now, except without being live or anything like that. But I was sending energy to her hands, and Gypsy was sending energy to her hands, and she made a remark that my hands are getting really hot. I'm sitting there going, wow, that's really cool, because magic is endless. You could stay in one point, cast a spell, and send it to another. The same way with your etherical energy that's from within, you could do the same thing, without casting a spell. You're just sharing energy from point A to point B.
Right.
I would love to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. And you'll notice, I said earlier that I have an ongoing hobby horse of interest in linguistics. Notice how the labels for these things change, because at one point, using energy focused through your hands to try to heal somebody would have been probably called laying on of hands.
Yep.
And then later on it becomes therapeutic touch, because it sounds more scientific, but it's the same thing. It's we always keep seeing this happening. It's certain
it gets
things.
reinvented as a new thing, and it's
Yeah,
like,
a new term.
no,
applied.
like, look back here. It started here. Now we're here.
Well, that's what charges your ebemes. That's what charges your wands. You know, that is the tools that you basically use to create your circle, to direct energy.
Mhm.
You know, it's like when I was a young neophyte, right after my initiation, my friend became inquisitive and asked me about witchcraft, and he was asking me, well, what do you do? And I had some books out. And I go, here, I'll you know, he was looking at it, and he goes, he made a remark, and I go, here, let me show you. And I took him downstairs to our ritual room. And I started speaking about things, you know, about the craft itself. And at that time, I reached down for the chalice, and I got electrocuted. And I looked at him, I go, I'm not supposed to talk about these things. But it was amazing to me that the power, you know, that impact coming back to my hand, you know, it was like something interdimensionally just reached out and just grabbed a hold of me and said, you're not supposed to do that. But the energy exchange, I would love to take a device, what you're talking about, and use it in ritual to measure, you know, the ebb and flow of the ritual. Like they're doing the quarter calls, drawing down the goddess, or using it during a Sabbath itself to measure what influx of information that you could get by when we call to the Lord and Lady and see what reverberates, you know, put it to the, I wouldn't say to the test, but to make it scientific, show people this is what happened during this point in time of the ritual.
Right.
I don't know if we would be allowed to do that, because I was always told, you know, don't bring in anything that's electromagnetic, a magnet, or have music go on. Music should be vocal, and it should always come from the heart. But I would love to lend credence to our brothers and sisters to see reality for them.
Like maybe that would convince some people who might not otherwise be convinced.
Yeah. But I'm not allowed to convert, though. You know,
no. But if somebody comes to you truly seeking, you would be allowed to show them
that. Yeah.
Of course, that again brings us back to how witchcraft has changed, because, you know, again, when I was young, it was a secret initiatory religion, you know, and that you didn't go much beyond your own coven, which again was typically only 13 people. And I think I saw a lot more really powerful magic happening within a coven of only 13 people who really learned to work together really well than I have ever since seen at a pagan festival or, you know, something like that, where you've got lots of people who really don't know each other very well, maybe from a lot of different traditions, and it just doesn't gel the way. And again, that may be another example of eclecticism versus you know, the depth thing. When you're working with the same group of people in the same tradition for a long time, there gets to be some kind of group manifestation. I don't know what to call it, but
I think the terminology would be, how can I say it? I'm going outside of my tradition, but I think the word is rigor, familiarity.
Like a group synergism.
Someone or heart, you know, it's like a drum circle. You know, you're all hitting the same beat, the rhythm, and your hearts start pumping as one. Your spirit becomes familiar as one. I think it's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of picture it like ties that combine. It's you open yourself up to the people when you are more used to their energy, when you feel safe, you know, when that kind of idea of the perfect love, perfect trust, when that really starts flowing,
Yes.
then you let down your guards, you open up your third eye, you
drop your
open
shield.
yourself up
Yep.
to just whatever has come, but you project more.
Yeah.
You're willing to share your energy with the people around you when you are in a tight-knit group that you trust, and that you know that they're not going to do anything outside of necessarily your comfort zone.
Right. I think
Well,
that's
the
really
whole
well
thing.
put. Really
Yeah,
well put.
you have the trust, you have the group dynamic, everybody's comfortable with each other, compatible personalities, like everybody's open, and not standing next to a bunch of strangers who, well, you're trying to achieve the same goal, different tradition lenses and
Yeah.
personal
You don't know
energy
them.
conflicts and things. Yeah, and
Right.
it moves a lot slower from my
Yeah,
experience.
you're
Or, like,
right.
versus my coven versus doing public events.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's and in a coven work, it's synergistic too. It is definitely more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
There's just something more than the individual players can bring to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely.
But
I miss those days.
And it's one of those that you're on the same page. You know, like, you guys can work towards a common goal together and not have that, like what you find with traditions and covens that have that lineage and that time frame together, that you're all working towards the same thought in a way, the same idea, the same goal. And when you are doing like a public rite, like, yeah, you might be, doing the winter solstice, and you might have like a certain kind of vibe going on, but you're not all working in sync to the same goal.
Yeah,
Right.
we're at least for ours, like,
Mhm.
coven ritual, like, all of the energy is going towards like one specific thing. Public rite, like, we're all raising the energy and like cycling it collectively, and then you get to the point where we're releasing the energy, and then you're directing a portion of that energy to where you want it to go for loved ones, for yourself, for whatever your goal is for this like collective energy raising. But it's like it splits off. It's not all going to one goal, which was like pre-agreed upon. So yeah.
Yep.
Or aren't we going down the rabbit hole tonight?
I feel like we could go
It's
down
so good,
so
though.
many more right now.
I know. We'll definitely have to have you back, because like I could do this for days.
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder how many people we still have with us.
We have
I'm sure they
3
can click
people
around.
actively watching, and then let me peek to see if it'll tell me how many people have watched so far.
And and I find that sometimes with the podcast series, it's one of the joy about it being on YouTube, where people can go back and watch it or pop in at later times.
Yeah.
It's like that resource where they can go back through and be like, okay, I can watch it now for 20 minutes because that's what I have, and then I can come back later on.
It's like
they follow the page.
That's like those little sticky tabs sticking out of your book you were talking.
Yes.
But
Like I have
tabs.
a wall
Mike,
of bookmarks for different people I follow to go back and check where I left off.
Right.
But this is something that I want to point out to everybody. Not just us, but these videos will be around for a long time. And the knowledge that we shared today is the basis of what tomorrow's craft is going to be. How many times in a person's life a neophyte has sought information and they're not able to find their answers? That's what this is all about. It's, for me, like Pagan Pride, when we was doing that, it was about bringing real witches to the table for people to meet and gain knowledge and wisdom. Our voices do count, not just today, but yesterday. How many people have you influenced throughout your life that are leading a religious, spiritual life, a life of transcendence? And that's what's important to me, is that we give people like you a voice, a platform where you can be totally honest about who you are, what you believe, whether it's parapsychology, the rituals. Your book is very important, because to me, when I read that book, I'm seeing the dance of the god and goddess, full blown, the spiral dance just going, and the bellfires are raising, no matter what we call our rituals, because you gave several examples here. But it's important to pass that knowledge on, whether it's through book or voice or actions. Maybe we could reach somebody and change their life, that may otherwise they wouldn't know God. I don't care what religion they are, whether they're Christian, Muslim, or whatever, but it's to reveal the truth of who we are and our perspectives, because I believe that many opinions formulate into an individual's opinion of how they see God and goddess. It's very important that they realize, yeah, there's a lot of science, but there's also a lot of spirituality and religious inclinations. I grew up Roman Catholic / Southern Baptist. And when you was talking about all that, well, I got news for a lot of people. The Catholics stole from us. Because we was around long before they was.
Oh, yeah.
But your voice is very important, and it amazes me how many authors and stuff, they have these great epiphanies of the religious experience, and we should talk about it openly. We shouldn't break our vows, because we all stand before the goddess Styx at one time or another, and she's the goddess of oaths. And we should be more open, because if we're not, if people like us who are traditional or have traditional fundamentals don't speak up and tell people, the circle is very important. Our foundations of our rituals are rooted since the beginning of time, since the first witches. Where would we be today? Where would I be? Where would you be, Mike? These things are so important. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent, but I want to point out to people that, yeah, traditional witchcraft. Thunder points out the circle a lot, center and grounding. Why does he do that?
I feel the same thing, where I can't tell you how many times I talk about spiritual hygiene with people.
It's so it's a passion to me. Ritual is a passion. It's like having sex for the first time. The little child who sees Santa Claus for the first time. The little child that lights up Easter morning when he's got a basket full of eggs of candy. These things are important. We should approach the craft as a child, always as a neophyte. Don't be the horse that has the blinders up. Don't be the dog who's chasing his tail. And I repeat this constantly, that we should share our traditions, that we shouldn't let it die. And if anything in our course, if we're oath bound, is to give good structure toward tomorrow's witch. That's me why, Mike, when I read your book the first time many years ago, I was a sponge. I was sucking up everything, every word, everything in that book. And that's why one year when Chrissy said, hey, who should we try to get to come to Pagan Pride? I'm like, Mike Nichols.
Why, thank you.
You show the main structure of the greater rituals, even though it's historical, but you did it right because you didn't give all the answers. You left the mysteries for the soul, the spirit to chase after.
Yeah.
You know, and to me, that's very important.
Yeah. Well, Mike, continuing on with what my father was saying, I mean, thank you so much for showing up tonight and having this conversation with us. I definitely think at some point in the future, if you're open to it, we'll definitely need to do a part 2 and kind of dive into more details, because I know my thoughts were definitely spinning on so many subtopics, and I just you can definitely tell that you've had, decades of just experience and knowledge and time to grow your thoughts on things. It's
people
incredible.
ask me, what can we do to get you on? And I'm usually like, well, just invite me. I'm I'm usually available and happy to do it. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Mike, my last question to you before we log out of here.
Mm-hmm.
If you was to come across a neophyte today and he would ask you, what direction should I go? What advice would you give?
Oh, you're good for tough questions, aren't you? Well, I would probably tell them I've got to go back to Joseph Campbell, I guess. Follow your bliss. Do the research, do the reading, however you research, whether it's reading, whether it's books, whether it's YouTube videos, whatever. Do as much as you can to gather knowledge, but then ask yourself what feels right to me, because everybody has to learn to recognize magical power. I mean, what it feels like, the way it feels to me is not the way it feels to you or anybody else. So your ultimate challenge is to recognize how it feels to you and be assured of that. Be comfortable and at home with that. To the point where there's no question. This is what I'm feeling. And if you can get to that point, then you're on the right track. Then just follow it. Follow that track down whatever path it takes you, because you're on the right path.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
You are a treasure, and I'm very blessed for encountering your book, Well,
thank you. I am very blessed to know you all, and it was great joy to me to be able to meet you and just hang out with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every time.
But you know what, Mike? Every time I hear a monkey song, I think of you.
Did I bring my guitar when I came? I don't remember.
No, you didn't. No, but I remember you.
I would have been playing monkey songs. I guarantee it.
But yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for writing such an encompassing book that left the mysteries open for a person. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. Great pleasure. Great honor.
All right. Well, it was great having you, and we're definitely going to have to do it again sometime. I know we mentioned it, but I'm serious. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't wait for a part 2 on it. All right. Well, thank you guys all for viewing the Within the Cauldron podcast and joining us tonight, or in future time frames. Feel free to check out our other episodes as well, and stay tuned. Before you know it, we'll probably have Mike Nichols on again.
I think we'll be back on this coming Saturday, be the 14th, and we'll be talking about Yule traditions and how we celebrate.
Great.
I'm excited. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody, and
Merry part, and thank you, Mike.
Good night.
Good night.